Welcome to Answers in Jubilees, produced by The God Culture. I'm going to keep this intro short again. It's time to explore Noah's division of the earth, which he inherited all of it, not just the Middle East, to his 3 sons. We just covered Shem last week. This video is Ham, and I'll keep it brief, though more details are in the Book of Jubilees, the Torah calendar. Available free with maps, in ebook, it is free, and you can purchase it on Shopee and Amazon in print internationally. Just go to bookofjubilees.org for links. I will read Jubilees on screen and demonstrate this on a map in the first map of the world with notes. Get out your Book of Jubilees and follow along. This map is in the Maps section and reading from Chapter 8. Understand you cannot forget the previous mapping of Shem, nor the next of Japheth, because they all hinge on each other, and this is very obvious when you keep everything in context, which today is very difficult because there are many trying to pull things out here and there and say, oh, well, but that direction says. No, in the scheme of the directions, it cannot possibly say that. So this way you can also understand Noah pronounced a curse on either son who steals territory from their brother for all eternity. He would not have overlapped any territory, and he did not in our mapping. These territories remain, and they came to us from Noah, who was given dominion over all earth. And he says, Yahuwah put these words in his mouth. Therefore, this is actually law, the law of Noah, you could say, and certainly from Yahuwah. Nations that bleed over these territories today are breaking Noah's law, just so you know. No wonder they censored this part of Torah. Now, let's begin. Last week we covered Jubilees 8 through 21 with Shem's inheritance, and it is so clear. The only thing left a little vague in Noah's directions there was the southeast border of Shem with Ham. Now, this will be fully defined today. We're reading in chapter 8, verses 22 through 24. For anyone haphazardly stumbling and fumbling around with these, when we get to week 5, Noah is going to make this law as territories go, pronouncing a curse on either son who would steal from another. That's why Jubilees has been censored by, well, in the height of the Holy Roman Empire, or the Roman Empire, now under the Holy Roman Empire, ruled by Pharisees, of course. You know. Before we dive in, a quick perspective to understand here. Remember, we just reviewed in Shem's territory the banks of the Gihon River, that's the river from Eden, represents the African continental shelf. That's what it says. Otherwise, Shem enters Africa, which makes no sense and actually goes against the rest of the mapping. Would not work. The Gihon River from Eden, the ancient river system, is most certainly, since the flood, on the bottom of the ocean. Now, we are not going to debate you from your position of not knowing our theory, so don't even try in comments, because we're just going to mute anybody who tries. This video is not about the rivers from Eden. We have a whole series. Watch it. That's our full theory. And then you're welcome to comment there, even negatively. It's okay. We can take it, but understand we will respond and probably put you in your place, because this is very well formed. We call it a theory, yet it is far better proven than much of science today. The Gihon encompasses the whole land of Ethiopia, Cush. Now, we'll deal with Cush's inheritance specifically in week 5, which further entrenches this completely. See, modern Ethiopia is not the ancient Ethiopia, but a very small sliver. I know there's others out there that say, oh, but the Cushite kingdom was... Well, even modern Ethiopia has the name Ethiopia, but it was known as Abyssinia, and within Ethiopia, but a small part, not all of Ethiopia. The Cushite kingdom was not all of Ethiopia. The modern country is a very minor portion of all of Ethiopia. Now, this is identified on many maps over many centuries, of which we cover, I don't know, about 20 or so. But here are 4, beginning in 450 BC, where Herodotus names Ethiopia coast to coast, east to west, and even the South Atlantic is known in history as the Ethiopic or Ethiopian Sea. Now, we still see this in 1467 from the 4th African map of Ptolemy, and African, by the way, with Media, Ethiopia, Ethiopia sub-Egypt, but then all the way to the west coast, Ethiopia interior. See, the whole central portion, largest portion of Africa, was known as Ethiopia back in the day for many centuries. The same in 1743 on the Holman map, which shows the same 3 sections of Ethiopia ranging all the way across Africa from coast to coast, east to west. And again, in 1771, Sir Francis Drake, Mr. Freemason. But regardless, Africans knew this as well as Europeans, and this is firm history. In order for the Gihan to surround the whole land of Ethiopia, defined by Herodotus, even during Bible times in 450 BC, and continuing to the period even after the King James was published, they knew that was Ethiopia from east to west coast. This shouldn't be a surprise, especially not to Africans, if you just know your geography a little. Jubilees defines the banks of the Gihan as the African continental shelf, and there's nothing to debate on that. That's what he's doing. And the Hiddekel is the same, as its banks are basically the nation of Iran's continental shelf of Asia. Daniel did not have to breathe on the bottom of the ocean floor when he had his vision, because he was in Iran, next to the Persian Gulf, nowhere near the Tigris River, where he never lived and never had any association with, doesn't even mention the Tigris in all of his writings. How about that? So he wasn't in Babylon anymore at that period, according to Scripture, and watch our Rivers from Eden series, and we vet that out and prove that from Scripture. Only an illiterate channel would pose such an illiterate question in ridicule. We publish our full theory on the Rivers from Eden in The Search for King Solomon's Treasure, with shorter version in Ophir Philippines Coffee Table book, and even in Jubilees, where we have color maps in both. Or watch the series on YouTube free. You should know this, and before someone says, "Oh, well, that's so unscientific," yeah, we get that all the time from people who are unscientific. Someone better tell PhD sedimentologist whose specialty is the bottom of the ocean floor, Dr. Parsons from the UK University of Hull, as he discovered an ancient river system on the bottom of the ocean floor. Hello? And it just happens to match everything in the Genesis descriptions, and no other theory does. Plus, we find Job clearly specifies this location of the rivers from Eden and the fountains of the great deep really twice. Second Esdras also expounds on this. The Dead Sea Scrolls nail it. I mean, the real question is, how did we miss this for so many years? Well, no longer. Watch or read for yourself. Now we have context to begin. And for him came forth the second portion, beyond the Gihan, that's the river from Eden, towards the south, to the right of the garden, that's Garden of Eden. Oh, does this say the garden is in Africa now? Well, Shem's territory just defined the Garden of Eden on his southeast border belonging to Shem, which Noah repeats numerous times, which is Southeast Asia. So, no, it's not in Africa. We have to leave Africa in order to get there. For those directionally challenged, scholars and trolls, Africa is not in Southeast Asia. Just saying. But the garden is, thus reasoning would allow one to deduce the garden is not in Africa. Period. The end. There's nothing to discuss on that. It is all the way on the opposite side of Shem, on the west. So how does he get from Africa, which is where this starts? Well, he crosses the Gihon, which, by the way, does not specify direction as it is in all directions, because the Gihon surrounds the whole land of Ethiopia Kush, which is all of Africa, because we already showed you it's east to west coast. The only way to get around that is on the bottom of the ocean floor. You got to be in the ocean there. It's the only way. There's no other way. So it's the whole land. Now, again, in regards to Ham, Shem's division went to the shores or shelf of Africa, to the banks of the Gihon River. That's what Noah just told us last week. So where does Ham start here then? Well, right there in Africa, where Shem bordered Ham, of course, which is sensible, just as Japheth will start right at his border with Shem as well, at the river Tina and the Ural Mountains and that whole area of Russia. Why? Well, Shem's is the foundation here, and that's clearly obvious. So somehow we have to get to the right of the Garden of Eden, or east. Right would be east, right? East of the garden. So, but that's all the way on the other side of the world almost. So we cannot go trampling back through Shem's territory, heading east, already assigned, as Noah pronounced a curse. So can't go there. It doesn't work. How do you get to the right or east of something which has a defined border on its east side, in which one cannot cross that territory in order to get there? And Noah even specifies that Ham next heads south of this intersection, and you'll see this, basically to intersect with the garden, just to the right of it, and then in order to get down to the border. So the border of Shem and Ham is just south of this intersection point, which means there is no way to get there otherwise. You have to head west. What he did is tuck away the garden at a point where the only way to reach it in these directions, when you're mapping it out, is for Ham to head west, which is the only way you get to the east or the right of something. You have to head west in order to get to the east of it. That's the way it works. Any other way makes no sense and violates Noah's law here, so it can't work. He, being about 800 years old at this point, was far smarter than you and I, exponentially. He preserved his directions. Now let's see. So Ham heads west beyond the Gihon, or he crosses it to the west, towards the south, the southern hemisphere, to the right, east of the garden. Wow. This must be the case in order to get to Shem's eastern border, yet north of his south border with Ham, according to the directions both from Shem and from Ham. Noah boxes this in brilliantly. Also, as you continue the directions, they then define themselves as next is the Indian Ocean, then a mention of South Africa, basically on the tip by name, then the South Atlantic, and it must, because from there it goes north to Gadir, Spain, so you're in the Atlantic at that point. So these are obvious, and there is no other way to really read this. Let's continue. And it extendeth towards the south. See, again, just like with Shem, you've got that same, direction there where the garden is just north of this point. Now, and it extendeth to all the mountains of fire. Again, remember, Shem's did the same from the other direction. It headed east to the garden, and then notes the garden is just north of Shem's southern border. They're in the far east with Ham, who is in the far east, according to these directions, yes. However, now we have complete definition. What are the mountains of fire? Well, volcanoes, right? But those are all over the world, in all three territories, actually. And the first and second largest nations on Earth for volcanoes, many do not even realize, are actually Russia and the U.S. See, they're part of the Ring of Fire, that whole Ring of Fire, and they're very, very large countries. So, anyway, those also, when you put that together with the rest of the Ring of Fire, runs through all three territories, so that doesn't work. No, this is far more specific. We are in Southeast Asia, so we need to find what are called the Mountains of Fire. Well, specifically, not just general. And we do. For Indonesia has a name for its 147 volcanoes, which form a natural border in a line almost across Indonesia, even splitting the island of Borneo. At the same point at which modern Malaysia and Indonesia are divided on that island to this day. Noah did that. And that's where that precedence started. And Sabah, to the north of that border, was Philippine territory in history, and many would say, and do say, it still remains so legally, and likely that is the case. Now, Indonesia calls its volcanoes, as a whole, all the volcanoes together, are called Gunung, meaning mountain, Gunung, mountains, Api, of fire. That's in Javanese, translated to English, mountains of fire. The exact same nomenclature used by Noah in that exact part of the world. Now, this is firm. We are going to offer a video just on this border region on the Garden of Eden so that it is abundantly clear, and we'll do that about week 6, I believe. Now, what Noah is doing here is using the Pison River from Eden as the border, just as he used the Gihon multiple times as the border and marker, and he will use the Hiddekel in the same fashion, which we will cover. Why? Well, that is the paradigm in which he is familiar. Noah's from before the flood, remember? Most of his life was prior to the flood. And his ancestor Enoch traveled the world carried by angels before the flood, and he wrote it down for Noah. He gave it to Noah and future generations, including us. And we have that here, recorded in the Book of Jubilees. Wow. And it extendeth towards the west to the sea of Attel. Now, it's funny because some illiterate put a supposed review, which is not a review at all. It's just a fraud, fictitious name, and we know who it is, but they put that on Amazon, and it's just a ridiculous paid blogger who is just of the most disgusting ilk, claiming we say that Noah spoke Bengali, essentially. Well, we don't, and we teach Hebrew was the language of the world before the flood, so duh, and that was just a couple of videos ago. When one is incapable of reason and logic, which that illiterate is certainly not capable of either, we are where we are here in the directions, okay? We are in Southeast Asia. That's where we are. And we head west into a sea. Duh, I don't know. What sea could it be? It doesn't take a rocket science to figure out this is the Indian Ocean, period. There's nothing to discuss, which, by the way, in ancient times, the Indian Ocean was called a sea. We've seen it called the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea, and even the Erythraean Sea. Now, there is nothing to discuss here on that, and nothing to debate, because we don't say what the illiterate says we say. Now, knowing this, we researched this word Attel. See, we did that second. First, we already determined this is the Indian Ocean because we know where we are. We know how to read a map. Now, we've already concluded that. That's done because we can read a map. Maybe he can't. No, not maybe. He definitely can't. But anyway, find the word appears Bengali or Indian. Now, we do not need that association to prove this. It is the Indian Ocean because that is the sea to the west of where we were in the directions. Really not hard. The fact that Atel is Bengali is a bonus, which connection we do not require, but it is neat that it is there, and we are researchers who ask such questions to affirm things we already know. We do not say this is the Indian Ocean because Atel is Bengali. That's stupid. We say it is the Indian Ocean because that is the sea to the west of Indonesia, where we were in the directions. That's it. And it's nice to know that it comes back full circle and ties that Atel is in fact a word in Bengali. Wow. And it extendeth towards the west till it reaches the Sea of Ma'uk. Notice west, west, west. It keeps saying west because we've been heading west in these directions all along. There's no doubting that. Now, the Sea of Ma'uk, that sea into which everything which is not destroyed descendeth. Now, some try to take this description to figure out what sea, yet ancient maps draw sea monsters, especially in the South Atlantic, often. And when there, you aren't really near anything, so if you have trouble at sea, you will likely sink. And that's pretty much what it's saying. It doesn't have to be a corruption because that is true of the South Atlantic. However, no one needs that to figure out where we are because the South Atlantic has known ties as the Ma'uk Sea, and even on by name, and even on the tip of South Africa is a place called Makaka, which even R.H. Charles and others figured out this must refer to the South Atlantic. Well, it has to anyway, because we're reading directions here, and we were in Southeast Asia, and we headed west into a sea. We know that's the Indian Ocean. And then we headed west into another sea. That's the South Atlantic. I mean, it's really not difficult. Now, the next portion of the directions tell us exactly where we are, because we are now aligned geographically south of Spain in the ocean. So, again, this is not real hard if we're looking at the directions in context. There's no other sea to consider here. Also, who is Ma'uk? That is the name of Ham's wife, Ni'alata Ma'uk, whom he also named a city after, just after the flood. We also know Africa is Ham's, and the South Atlantic on maps belonged to Africa all the way up until the 1800s as the Ethiopic Sea, named for Ham's wife originally Ma'uk, and as Cush, Ethiopia, took over Canaan's defaulted territory on the west coast. See, because remember, Canaan stole Israel instead and did not go to his inheritance, which was that area of West Africa. So that became Cush, Ethiopia. I don't blame him. I would have taken it too if I were him. And he was allowed, because that's in Ham's territory, and defaulted. Now we'll cover that, which is why his territory is so vast. And that's why. That's why Ethiopia, when you look at the directions, he has most of the east coast to central maybe, and he picked up the west coast, and that's how that happened. And that's just logic. His descendants must have begun calling it, however, the Ethiopian Sea instead at that point. We are in the South Atlantic, and we also know we are because of where we head now. And it goes forth towards the north to the limits of Gadir. Now that's Spain, well-recorded modern Cadiz. This will end up becoming the dividing line for Japheth and Ham, all the way across to the west into the Americas, which we will cover next week. Now, just as Noah did in his directions for Shem, he recaps as his custom was to be clear. And rightfully so. Otherwise, his pronouncing a curse on one living over their border into a brother's land would be unfair, and Noah was not unfair. Where are we? Well, we are in Gadir, Spain, modern Cadiz. Now, next week, this will be firmly defined by what we call the 37th parallel. That's where that is. If you draw a line from there across to the Americas, that's the 37th parallel. From Gadir, Spain, and it goeth forth to the coast of the waters of the sea. Now, wait a minute. He just headed west from Spain, just as his perspective has been all along. What sea is he talking about? This is the Ma'uk Sea, or the South Atlantic. He just crossed the Atlantic to the coast of whatever land is over there. What is that? It's the Americas. Right there in Noah's directions. America's been there all along. Columbus didn't know about it, but Noah did. Now, that is the next coast from there, and there's no other way to look at that. And also, fully affirmed in Japheth's directions coming, you'll see. Then he heads further west, now into a greater ocean, the Pacific. To the waters of the Great Sea. Now, the Pacific is far greater, or in Bible terms, the word great means largest, larger, is the definition of that Hebrew word anyway. Now, so he is saying, by bodies of water now, that is the recap, bodies of water. That's what this is doing. From Atlantic to Pacific. Now, he already covered the detail of the Atal Sea, or Indian Ocean. So he skips it here because he doesn't need it. He already covered that. And he goes right to the end of the directions, which is also where he began. It is full circle, and nothing else would make sense here. Till it draweth near to the Gihon River, the river Gihon. In other words, the Gihon surrounds all of Africa, and Africa is 100% Ham's. All of it belongs to Ham. It was the start and the end of the directions. Noah just took us around the entire earth in the southern hemisphere, which is all Ham's. All of it. Though not mentioned, we believe that would also include all the way to Antarctica, which likely Noah would not even define as a continent for probably obvious reason. Then Noah brilliantly recaps again and records from the Gihon again, or Africa, and again recaps this is to the west, and goeth along the river Gihon till it reacheth the right of the Garden of Eden. He's repeating himself, which we already covered is the westerly direction in order to reach the right or east of the garden. Noah is telling us again, this must be a westerly direction. The garden is the very holy of holies of Yahuwah, so yeah, it matters immensely to Noah and to Yahuwah, and should to all of us, really. And Noah uses it to define these territories. But the garden, as we said last week, must be in Shem's, not Ham's. So it is where Ham meets Shem. And Ham is just east of it. He is reaffirming the Gihon to the garden connection. Again, here at the end, which he already defined very specifically. So it's starting to really take shape. In fact, right now you could stop right there, and you already know what Japheth's territory is, but Noah goes on and defines it anyway, and we'll cover that next week. And he ends with this, verse 24. And this is the land which came forth for Ham, as the portion which he was to occupy forever, for himself and his sons unto their generations forever. Forever, forever. You think he might mean always, perhaps? This is the division by law of the only man who inherited the earth after the flood. No one can change them, and they stand forever. Unto all of our generations forever. Period. The end. The New Testament does not change these, nor would they. These remain, and we should all be well aware of this mapping. Wait till you see how this affects prophecy and end times, for instance, to come. Next week, Japheth, and then the grandsons of Noah. Without this information, no one can possibly understand biblical geography, which means they cannot understand prophecy, not even migrations, and even people groups and history. It all needs this restoration of Torah. DNA studies require this restoration, or they are in danger of misinterpretation, which we see often. We must know where these places are, and schools and even churches are not teaching this. However, this is knowledge that has been preserved and passed down through the ages. This book that many of you are holding in your hand right now originates in, at least that we can document in archaeology, at 150 BC. It's over 2,000 years old, that book that you're holding in your hand. Wow! That is monumental, just unto itself. And then the fact that you can test it and find it to be Torah, oh, this is incredible. But we encourage everyone, test the Book of Jubilees and know this for yourself. Yah bless to all. The Book of Jubilees, the Torah calendar, named by the temple priests in Qumran as the source of the exact determination of how to keep Torah's calendar in the Damascus document. Yes, they called it Torah and used it as such. This book renders the very first map of the world, the most ancient geography in all of history. Jubilees, also known as the Book of Division, as Noah partitions the entire earth to his 3 sons, finds the Garden of Eden in the Philippines, pinpoints the seat of Gog of Magog's power, demonstrates continental divides originate with Noah, and much more. It is the second witness to Genesis in Torah and concurs. It tests as Torah, and we encourage you to review this full test for yourself in the beginning of this book. It was the priests who were exiled from the temple who lived in Qumran, known in Bible times as Bethabara, where Messiah was baptized and John the Baptist, of temple priestly caste, lived and operated. As these were his fellow Levite priests exiled from the temple, who continued to keep Scripture there, as well as operate a functioning compound modeled in part after the temple. This is the only historic library of precedence for the Old Testament canon in ancient history, yet explained away in willing ignorance, just as 2 Peter 3 warned. Based on the R.H. Charles translation from the Ethiopic, this book will enlighten, and its revelation will rock your world. As all 50 chapters appear in this book with curated and edited margin notes, in large print Bible format, easy to read. This 288-page quality paperback has a high-resolution section of maps that represent the world's oldest map by Noah. Read it and test it for yourself, and you will likely find, as we have, this book is inspired, and even canon, in history. Available free worldwide in ebook, or purchase a print copy today on Shopee Philippines or Amazon internationally. Just go to bookofjubilees.org, and the links are there for your area. We also offer bundle pricing with our other books in the Philippines. Our books are already expanding now, being read in 52 countries and more than half of the provinces in the Philippines. Join thousands who are finding this useful in their lives.